Hi, everyone. So my talk is called How Design has Changed in One Industry Year and How to Get Ahead of the Curve. So just a little bit about myself. I have worked in the industry for 4 or 5 years. I've worked on all the Disney Infinity games, so pretty big franchise. And I actually started as a programmer on F1. Now I'm freelance, and I'm sort of defining the kind of bare bones of a new startup game, which is a third-person action game, and writing the AI for it and doing combat design and enemy design and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a technical designer / systems design role. So this talk is basically kind of 4 things that I feel like I've learned in that time and that I feel would be really useful for people going into the industry. So it's like four separate topics. So the first one, I wanted to sort of kick off with something a little bit more fun, is about the way you as designers actually create a game. Because we all have a process, and our process is something that we're used to applying when we have a blank piece of paper. So maybe you want to be an indie dev, or maybe you want to make AAA games, but we're very used to thinking, okay, so this is how I want to make a game in an ideal way, you know, and this is mine just for a kind of high-level kind of example. It changes quite a lot, but this is what it is at the moment. So the way I like to design is start with a core feeling that you want to evoke from the player. You work out what gameplay you think will actually create those feelings. This is massively simplified. But then from that gameplay, you create things like level design and the metrics out of the movement of that character, enemy design, that kind of thing. And then, if you've linked gameplay and level design enough so that they're really interdependent, you can do a really nice thing, which is that you vary the pressure of an encounter based on how you make a level, or say you make an enemy who is good in one area but bad in another. I mean, enemy design is a bit of a simple example. Your game might not have enemies in it, but just to show you what I'm talking about. So this is kind of the way I wanted to design. And the thing that really kind of knocked me for 6 when I first got into the industry is that you can't follow that rule. You've got this idea of how you want to design games, but it's just not going to be possible to do that because you're going to enter into a company where the design is already set. So you're going to have the level design is already going to be there. There's going to be, loads of different types of multiplayer levels, and it will be your job maybe to make the enemies. So the key about this is to kind of work out exactly what the dependencies between each of your steps are. So a little bit like that. The idea being that if you really understand at a really fundamental level how all these things fit together, then you're not going to be sort of left not knowing where to start when somebody says, okay, make some enemies. So this actually happened to me, and just to give you kind of a basic example, if there are already, say, a load of levels in the game, talking about a traditional action game, and say there's small ones and enclosed ones and big ones, and you find that the gameplay doesn't feel any different in any of them, well, you can't do anything about that. You're not the person that's actually in charge of creating the core mechanics. But what you could do is you could go, okay, well, this is how I want to work. Maybe I can create an enemy that, I don't know, knocks you back a really long way. So now if there's an edge, they're a dangerous enemy. If there's not, they're not a dangerous enemy. So it's kind of trying to be true to the way you want to design and trying to be able to fit that into somebody else's work. So there's a few more things I wanted to say on that. The idea is, okay, so you have your process. Can you apply it? There's some other things. So it's all talking about how to apply what I just talked about, but can you stay strong when, trying to think of the non-offensive way of saying the shit hits the fan. When the shit hits the fan. So when crunch time comes around, quite often it's very easy to fall back on bad design. Or at least not bad design, but a kind of standard design. We play a lot of games because, we're all huge nerds, or as somebody corrected me to earlier, game enthusiasts. So it's very easy to go, oh my God, this isn't working. Okay, I'm going to put a big beacon over the objective, say you're a mission scripter. And it's important to go back to your process and kind of think about what it is that you want to achieve, and think about how you can do that. And the reason it's so important to have that process really, really down is that that actually lets you go back to this thing on a piece of paper and go, okay, I know where to go next. Otherwise, you're just left really not knowing what to do. A legacy of bad design is kind of, I worked at some companies early in my, my career that will remain nameless, and they're not even on my LinkedIn, so there's no witch hunting. But you will quite often find the same thing, that there is design that you don't agree with. And one thing that's really, really common for young designers is to go, well, this whole game isn't made the way I would make it, so I'm just going to kind of give up. I'm going to do a standard thing. And again, it's nice if you can go back and kind of try and do something cool with the piece that you're given and make it stand out. This is a really interesting one, negative feedback from playtests. It kind of relates to pressure again, which is, and this will happen, it will basically always happen. You will design something that you think is cool and elegant, and then you'll playtest it, and the, I don't know, studio head or your line manager will come back and they'll say they didn't get it. And you just have to be able to kind of stay strong. It's actually really simple things as well. It's like if your mission involves, say you're creating a mission, or your piece of, I don't know, the game involves exploration, for example, then it's okay that the player has spent a long time wandering around. People might come back to you and say, this isn't fun, you know, people got lost. This happened to us a lot on Disney Infinity. People were worried that the kids weren't having fun because they were lost, but actually you just need to have those answers there. And this is important because it's something that will kind of hit you early, and it's very easy to have like a knee-jerk reaction and change your design when in actual fact when you're a little bit more experienced, you realize that sometimes people are just pushing you because they want you to reinforce what you've designed. So this is a sort of, again, the same point. Don't forget to design as you. Quite often, it will feel like people are kind of pushing you to design the way they want to design. And you just have to remember that they've employed you because you're an interesting person, you're an interesting designer, and I'm not speaking about myself. That sounded incredibly self-serving. But yeah, so just try and keep your flavor of design in the game, and it's very easy to forget that, and it's a bit demoralizing too. So you don't need to give into that. This is not meant to be aimed at your design. It's talking about studios in general. It's just a small kind of point beside all the others, which is that when you get into a games company, a lot of the time you spend the first few months going, why don't people see that there's something wrong with this design? And basically the answer is everyone sees that there's something wrong with that design, and that there's just some kind of weird restriction. Maybe it's something that's come down from a publisher, and that really helps because you don't feel like everyone is kind of against you. So that is the section that's about process. So, okay, moving on. Okay, so the importance of presentation and selling your ideas internally. So this is basically about the importance of realizing that people don't get your idea. They can't see what's inside your head. And it sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but I just wanted to emphasize it because it's so true. And the more extreme that you go to kind of counteract that, the more successful you'll be, you know, and that will happen quite quickly. So one thing that's interesting is that game feel, you know, making things feel good when you press a button, and aesthetic design is actually so much more important than I thought it would be when I first got into the industry, with regards to prototypes, with regards to like early work when you're showing people. Because basically something that happens more often than not, and for no one's kind of fault, is that you hand somebody a piece of work and they'll go, it's not fun. It doesn't feel good. And you might say as much as you want, you know, no, you have to imagine that you're doing this. But basically, it makes your life a lot easier if you just realize that people don't make that leap. And I think that's true of everything in every industry. So it's important to get that right. It's a really kind of fundamental point. And I would say that it's more important to get that right than it is to make it look nice. It's kind of okay if it doesn't really look nice, but if there's good feedback to it, then it goes a long way. So it kind of links into talking about prototyping. So you want to make it representative of the thing that you actually want to be in the game. So that does kind of talk to visuals a little bit. when you're proving something to yourself, you might have a prototype that just involves kind of cubes and spheres. And I really thought that you could show that to somebody and they'd go, yeah, okay, I get it. But people don't get it. And you might have someone you eventually develop a relationship with, and that's great, and then maybe you can take a shortcut. But essentially, get people on board with your idea, get it to look good, get it to feel good, and if you can't do that, show them some concept. Not even concept art that an artist has made for you, but a concept art that you find on the web somewhere. So the thing that I'm really trying to hammer in is that you actually have to sell your ideas internally. So this is another one, using existing games as a prototype. This is something that I just didn't even think of before somebody else told me. And it's, if there's a game and you want to make a feature for it, and the feature is like something else that's in another game, get that game and make them play it, and say, I want it to be like this, but imagine this little bit is different, because that it just speaks so much louder than asking them to move a few cubes around and imagine that they're, I don't know, on a boat or something. And again, draw people into the prototype. And like really hammering that point is that do all of the things that you've read about that people do to sell their games online. So it's like, we did this with one guy in our old studio who was a concept artist called Damien Bazubi, really talented guy, used to work on the Fable games, most enthusiastic person on the planet. So if you wanted your thing to be in a game, sell him on it. And the idea was we instead of just having a little prototype we could carry around, it was something that we could send around and people could install, and it was a network thing, and we made a little forum for it on a kind of an internal community page. And it sounds like going overboard, but it helps so much. And just as a side note, of course it's important to realize when somebody else's idea is good and kind of help them with that as well. But it's one of those things where I mean, maybe you wouldn't have made this mistake, but I really thought I could sit in a corner at first, make good ideas, and that people would kind of notice them, but you actually have to market them. And it's, I hope that doesn't sound as cynical. It's not supposed to, it's just one of those things. I think it's kind of a universal truth of working in any industry. All right, so this next sort of mini section is about kind of starting to do industry work, and it's about keeping it simple. And basically, as game designers, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things because we get obsessed with weird ideas about complexity and systems that combine with each other and do really, really cool things. And you will, as someone, I mean, this will just happen, you will learn how much simplicity is your friend. And it's not to say that those systems aren't cool, and it's not to say that they can't work, but it's just, this is sort of an extension of the advice, which is just like bite off something small at first. But there's a bit more to it than that. So one of the things is don't try to steal focus. And I don't mean that in kind of a bad way. I don't mean that you're going to go in there sort of shouting and waving your arms around. I just mean that you have to realize that your part of the game fits into a much larger picture. So there was a really nice talk, actually, The Last of Us Melee talk, that stands for. There's a talk done by one of the guys that works at Naughty Dog, who worked on the Melee system for The Last of Us. And basically, it all boils down to, the message of it is, I had to realize that my system was not, the whole game. At first, he had counters and blocks and dodges and all this kind of stuff. And eventually, he just boiled it down to just hitting people. And then if they're near a wall or something, then you can do these kind of environmental takedowns where he'll like smash somebody's head into a wall. So really kind of peaceful stuff. A focus on polish is not as generic as it sounds. It's, again, from that talk, there were some really cool things in that system that take a long time to put in there, and that's what people are looking for AAA development. So for example, one of the things that's in there is if you manage to kick a guy down to the ground, sorry that all my examples are so violent, if you manage to kick a guy down to the ground and then you pull out a gun and aim, the guy will automatically aim at the person's head. So you can pull off this really nice little sequence of moves where you kick a guy down to the ground and instantly kind of shoot him in the head. Nice, depending on how you look at it. But it's those little touches, it's that polish and that kind of attention to detail that makes a difference between how we would design as students and how I used to design and how you would design as like a AAA dev, because that's what they want. They want kind of little, simple but deep, systems, if that's what you're designing. This is sort of the same point. It's keeping it simple. KISS, obviously, everyone knows, stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. Most people miss off the stupid, but that is what it stands for. So yeah, I mean, while you're learning, this is really, really important. And it's one of those things where I can completely understand if this advice isn't something you take to heart, because it's so hard. You're working in a games company for the first time and it's really exciting. But if you can kind of learn by creating something simple and then learn complexity later, like complexity will be something that you can do in your design, but it's just, it really is something that should come later, because there's so many things that are going to catch you out, even just knowing how long something takes to complete. So, learning that kind of stuff first. And it's because of these fundamentals. There are a lot of things in the games industry that are kind of taken for granted, but there's not a great amount of documentation about them. So it's things like readability and game feel and all this kind of stuff. It's about how to kind of tutorialize the player, and it's almost like when you get into a games company, there's a sort of hive mind about this basic design stuff. And I think that stuff is getting more and more formalized now, but basically it's stuff that, your first kind of year in the industry, you're just absorbing this kind of methodology that everyone has on kind of how to make a game. And it's an amazing kind of learning experience, but it's definitely something where you don't want to, I mean, basically what will happen if you try and design something complex at first is you'll end up cutting it down towards the end of the project anyway, down and down and down and down, so that it's something you can finish. And then you'll have something simple at the end, but it won't be simple and deep like it would have been if you'd made the simple system and then had a chance to kind of do all those cool little touches. This is an interesting one. Be your own mentor. I think this is a slightly cynical thing to say. It's definitely not true with industry-wide, but you might very well find that you're working in a company where you are a good designer, and the people who you're working for might not even be designers, or you might disagree with the way they design. Design is a very misunderstood profession in games, because it's been around for such a short amount of time. It's been around far shorter, really, than the games industry, because it's only really become a job recently, to be honest. But trying to become a better designer through communicating with other designers online, getting in contact with people. People are amazingly responsive with that kind of thing. And just kind of teaching yourself, reading Gamer Sutra, going through the inevitable kind of curve with Gamer Sutra where it's like, I'm learning, and then you're like, oh, I disagree with everything. But it's still good to disagree with it, because you can, you start to understand why you disagree with it. And I guess my point is that it's one of those things where you get thrown in at the deep end. You get thrown in there as a designer, and it's like, okay, what are we making? And I've got a little bit more about that in a minute, but basically it's, get prepared to just take what you're passionate about and just keep learning. So again, the process and being able to kind of have your own process, very formalized, be able to kind of, adapt it to different situations. And of course, you're not designing for yourself anymore. Which is a weird sort of mental shift to go through. I think it's no secret. I started on F1, and it's no secret I'm not really a racing game person. The studio who I worked for then started to make Disney Infinity, so I told them I was pretending the whole time. Hopefully, no bad feelings now. But so it's a strange mental shift, but it will kind of happen. At first, you might not be designing the thing that you want to make ultimately, because you've just come from being someone who plays games and now you're someone who makes games, but that will kind of put its hooks into you. The more you kind of do it, the more you study it, the more you'll get obsessed with how to solve problems. So I wouldn't worry about that. This is a little kind of warning thing as well. Your work will still be judged. It's just trying to hammer in that you should still try and do a cool thing with what you're designing. Try and be yourself. Try and put your own kind of twist on it, because at the end of the day, even if someone else has asked you to make something a certain way and you've kind of relented and you've designed it that way and you think, okay, well, I don't like this, but whatever, somebody will come back and they'll say, well, why did you do it like that? So be aware that, you know, the stuff you're making ends up being played by millions of people, and no one's going to remember that you're not the one that made the decision to make it like that. Right, so this just goes on a little bit for working for other people. Well, no, sorry, not working for other people. This is kind of an interesting thing as well, which is that, you know, as a designer, the one thing that's really scary when you first get into the industry is that you're actually generating work for people. You're generating work for a lot of people. So what you don't really want to do is create work and then realize that it doesn't work, and you have to kind of backpedal. So proving your idea, but it's proving it to yourself. So prototyping is really important, but it's mostly important for yourself to actually prove that the idea is fun. So don't start work until you know you won't break anything in the design, because you guys obviously are of sort of prime age to just go off and get your first job in the industry, and that's a really easy thing to do. So make sure that you kind of think about all the aspects of the game, the level design, you know, every kind of part of it, an element of it, because you know, this happens a lot in games companies. Someone will introduce a core mechanic that suddenly negates all of the metrics in a level, for example, because now they can jump higher and now the level needs to be rebuilt. And that's something you really want to avoid. Yeah, again, prototyping for yourself. And this is the other thing, and I hope I've sort of been hammering home kind of the same points for this whole thing, but telling people exactly what you're picturing is one of those really obvious things, but it's something you don't think about at first. So when you come to talk to a concept artist, it's really easy to walk up to them and say that you want a certain thing, you want a character, and they're going to do this or they're going to do that. But the surprising thing is that because you're designers, I mean, maybe you can't relate to this, and I don't think I could even at first, but a lot of people want to be told what to make. It's not 100%, it's not kind of a universal thing, but most animators, most concept artists, most modelers, they want you to tell them what to make. You know, you're driving this. So you have to go up to them and you have to tell them exactly what you want. So it's like, if you're giving a concept artist a character, it's like, they, you know, give them a kind of a brief summary of what their personality is like, maybe give them a little bit of concept art, like everything you possibly can. And, you know, at first that feels strange because you feel like maybe you're taking the fun part of somebody's job away. But you can just say to them, look, you know, do you want me to do this? And most of the time they will. So that's important, because that's the hardest thing about working with young designers, is they're just kind of vague. They'll come up to you and they're kind of giving you work, but you don't really know what's going on. And from your point of view, you don't want to ask for something, have something be brought back, and then go, oh crap, okay, that's actually the wrong thing. And you know, you don't want to have that conversation where you're saying, actually, it should be something else. Yep, concept and reference. So yeah, and that is actually it. So hopefully that was kind of 4 bite-sized pieces of advice. At least I think that's it. Have I gone? No. So there we go. 4 bite-sized pieces of advice about kind of working in the AAA industry. And also, you know, if any of you want to ask questions about kind of more indie-related stuff, I'm doing a lot of freelance at the moment. I think this all massively still applies. So yeah, thank you. And questions? Sorry, say that again? Startups. That's an interesting question. I'm working for a startup at the moment. I think one of the things, I don't know, it's a difficult one. Okay, so you want to start your own company? I think the one thing I would say would be, do not get overexcited about your idea and ask people to do work before you know. It's kind of one of those points where it's like you're generating work for people. Because I've been involved with a lot of startups where somebody's really, really into their idea, so they go, okay, can you make me these animations, or can you make me this character model? And then you change your idea. I mean, I guess the other piece of advice that's sort of inherently in that is, like, as a designer or as a game maker, lock your idea down, because you do get, you know, you'll play Mario and then you'll want stuff from Mario in it, and you'll play, you know, it's very easy to kind of flit around with your ideas, but you just have to kind of lock it down, not waver from that, make that game. And yeah, I think that's an important lesson, a hard one to learn.
as I said, you need to sell the idea for a team internally, right? But I assume you need to sell the same idea to the programmer and to the animator in a completely different way. How do you approach that?
So you don't always need to sell the idea to everyone. But if you, I mean, it's just kind of a skill you learn, I suppose, is you're trying to sell it to them in the way that will appeal to them. But quite often that's the same thing, because quite often those people just want to make something cool. So you're going to them and you're saying, OK, I've got this idea, and you have to explain why it would be fun. And then you just say, OK, and I need this kind of code from you. I need these animations. People are actually really, really happy to get involved and give you their spare time. So they'll stay after work, trying to prototype something out if they think it's really cool. But that's kind of the rub. You know, you have to convince people that it is really cool. And you have to convince yourself first, so that once they've done the work, it's not just something that, you know, is a bit of a damp squib, and then you've annoyed people because they've got, you know, home late to their kids for a week. So yeah.